You are listening to GeekFest Rants on the IC Robots Radio Network.
You have located GeekFest Rants, the entertainment podcast for genre geeks like you.
Shall we play a game?
Covering the world of vintage and current film and television since 2010.
Game over, man. It's game over.
Featuring in-depth conversations on sci-fi, horror, fantasy, comics, toys, and conventions.
So say we all. So say we all.
And now sit back, relax, and enjoy today's show.
Transmission authorization code Delta 964 Zulu Bravo.
I am David, son of the late Peter Wayland, your company's founder. This primordial ooze ripe with advanced nanoparticles. It is essentially a form of radical AI that generates a unique reaction to every genome it encounters. I finally found my wolf, but I have still one thing left to perfect.
We've picked up a distress signal.
I've been marooned here.
Is it safe?
Perfectly safe.
Let's kill this thing.
Alien couples at these digital stores.
Please relax whilst we recalibrate for your configuration.
I have a feeling this is not going to be relaxing.
Necessary to be strapped in?
Is it normal to be scared?
Oh, fuck you!
Are you experiencing feelings of fear?
Feel.
These are human insecurities.
Ash, can you see this?
Yes, I can. I've never seen anything like it.
Let's get the hell out of here.
Wait a minute, this movement.
I've lost the signal. Oh, God, it's moving right towards you. It's got to be around there.
Dallas?
Hi everybody and welcome once again to GeekFest Rants. My name is Carlos Perone, and today we are going to be talking about Alien Covenant, specifically the DVD release, or Blu-ray, or 4K, depending on what you have. Unfortunately, it's not in 3D because the film was not in 3D to begin with. They departed from the previous Prometheus 3D version to now this film being released in a non-3D fashion, and therefore the home video release not having a 3D version. But one of the best things that I remember that was announced ahead of time, and this is something that's happened before, is all the deleted scenes. And this is something that I've been waiting for a while now, because you do know when you have a Ridley Scott film, especially in the Alien franchise, like they did with Prometheus, that there were going to be quite a number of scenes that hopefully we were able to, view in a deleted scene chapter on some kind of bonus disc or something like that, and that is exactly what they've given us. We have a ton of deleted scenes, similar to the Prometheus release, and not only do we have that, but we also have some bonus material that is even more interesting than the deleted scenes, and we're going to talk about all that. We're going to also talk about the future of the franchise, where it stands right now, where it was supposed to be going, where we thought it was going to be going at one point, what the plans look like, directly from what the studio seems to be leaking out as far as information goes. And we will go into my own predictions based on all the information I've been gathering all over the place in terms of what could happen next. We kind of know there is going to be a next one, I hope. And, I do have a pretty clear idea, I think, of what direction they want to go, but you never know. They could always surprise us with what happens next. As you guys probably know already, based on the viewing of just the film itself, I was very happy with the outcome of Covenant in terms of where the story took us this time. And while looking at all these deleted scenes and even reading the novel, you'll hear about how, it seems to be heading in a good direction as far as I'm concerned. So, getting our hands on this current Blu-ray version is really, really good as far as the bonus material. That is the stuff that I live for, especially on films like this. Then later on the show, we are going to continue with a segment we started a couple of weeks ago having to do with posters. I have 2 more posters this time that we're going to go over because originally I was doing them only once a month. I was kind of like putting up a new poster every month, and then I realized I have way too many posters here, and I do want to be able to enjoy these other posters that I have. So I'm up to now 2 posters a month. I've actually been able to put up 2 posters in my office that basically every 2 weeks I change one. So right now we are going to go over my current pair, which is The Thing, the original John Carpenter's The Thing, and the re-release of The Empire Strikes Back in 1981. So we're going to talk about the posters. We're going to talk a little bit, as usual, we'll weave in and out about the movies and some of the background material having to do with how these posters were designed and so forth and so forth. So let's get started with Alien Covenant Blu-ray deleted scenes and bonus material.
What did I teach you?
You are the Duke of New York. You're a number 1.
You will not laugh. You will not cry. You will learn by the numbers. I will teach you.
Can you dig it?
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
That spawn of Satan.
Oh, really?
The Force will be with you, always.
Today we're going to return to a movie we recently watched, Alien Covenant. The reason why we're returning to it is because, as usual, we absolutely love the Alien franchise, especially anything Aliens or before, and the modern ones. No big mystery that I'm not a big fan of what followed Aliens. But these new Ridley Scott versions, prequels really, I really managed to enjoy. And similar to what happened with Prometheus, whereby once the DVD home version was released, we were able to see a lot more stuff. Not all of our questions were answered, but we were giving a peek at a whole bunch of new stuff that really helped, to kind of wrap your mind around what was happening at the time. Well, similar to that, now we have Alien Covenant and the home video version release, which included a pretty nice big chunk of deleted scenes and additional bonus material. So I figure we pick it up at the deleted scenes. Similar to what's been done in the past, this isn't a director's cut. Ridley Scott seems to prefer to just add his extra scenes at the end. And a lot of these deleted scenes, it's funny because as I'm watching them, I'm recognizing them not so much from the movie, obviously because they weren't in the movie, but because of the novel, the movie tie-in novelization. This particular one was penned by Alan Dean Foster, who's super famous movie tie-in writer. He's a writer on his own accord, but I've probably read so many of his books, not even at the time realizing it was his, but he seems to be like the go-to guy when it comes to movie novelizations. And in the last year or so, I've been collecting a lot of movie novelizations of not only current movies, but older movies that I've seen in the past that I wanted to take a second look at in the novelization form, because a lot of times you do end up finding a lot of stuff. In this particular case, with the novelization, there were a lot of differences, and I would like to think that a majority of those differences were because of the script, the particular draft that he was working from, in order to put this novelization together. And it seems to coincide a lot of the things that we're seeing here on these deleted scene clips with some of these additional scenes that he had. So that's kind of interesting. The DVD that was released, as usual, you have your DVD, you have your Blu-ray. You don't have a 3D version because the film was not in 3D. But you also have a 4K version, which is the latest and greatest format out there right now, which, I do not own a 4K set or player yet. However, I am starting to go in that direction when it comes to purchasing Blu-rays. Because I prefer the 3D versions, if there is a version that includes 3D and 4K, I would get that. If there is no 3D version, I will get the one that includes the 4K and the Blu-ray, together, which they kind of seem to be pairing those up, I guess, as a way of transitioning people from one format to the other. Now, unfortunately, they are, I believe, charging a little extra for the 4K. There might be $3 or $4 more, per disc. But I guess that's what you get. When you want new technology, you got to pay a little extra. But anyway, let's start going over some of these deleted scenes. There's a total of 12 deleted scenes in this disc. The first one is called Prologue Extended. And this is basically the prologue in the beginning of the film between David and Waylon, where Waylon, is welcoming David into the world, more or less. And David starts to ask questions right away that Waylon is becoming a little upset, I think, about the kind of questions that David is asking and the conclusions that David is coming away with in terms of, the fact that he is more powerful and more smart and more everything than a human being, including his own creator, and he is going to outlive his creator, and Waylon is getting annoyed at those kind of conclusions that he's coming up with. So there is a little more of the back and forth between those two. They only trimmed it by a little bit, and it is called an extended scene. So it is pretty much the same scene, except that they do kind of throw these jabs at each other a little more during the scene. Second one is called Walter in the Greenhouse. Now, this is a scene that, yes, I do remember, just like the opening prologue. In the novel, they do go through this sequence where before the ship is hit by that pulse, solar flare, whatever the heck it is, neutrino, Walter is at the greenhouse area of the ship, and they have a hydroponics kind of area where while he's taking care of the plants and watering them or whatever the heck he's doing to them, he's whistling to him, and Mother, the computer, reminds him or tells him that, hey, this is not, the plants, it's a myth that plants react to music. And he kind of tells Mother that, no, he's not doing it for the plants. So that gives you an early kind of warning, I guess, to the fact that Walter is a little bit outside of his normal programming. He is doing something that would be considered to be irrational, almost human-like. But I guess it was an early manner, in terms of them wanting to trim things out. I get it. You trim to make shorter. So this was also a way of not tipping your hand that Walter is having somewhat of the little inklings of independency that normally his model would not have. The third deleted scene is Orm and Daniels Extended. And this is after Daniels loses her husband and she's in shock, and Orm kind of tells her, why don't you take some time off and go to your room and kind of cry it out. And it kind of builds on the fact that Orm is just such a bad leader. And he tells her probably the worst thing he could tell her, under the state she's in. And again, this is also, I do remember this scene from the book, but it was a little trimming, and it kind of would build a little more the dislike that Daniels has for Orm, and it shows the audience how just not leadership material that Orm really is. That scene is quickly followed by another scene, which is the fourth deleted scene, of Walter visiting Daniels, in her room. He visits her because he knows that she's not working. She was told to kind of take some time off, and he brings her pot, basically, to kind of, I guess it would be the equivalent of bringing her a bottle of booze, let's say, for example. In this case, it's different. They use pot because apparently it's something that he was able to grow in the garden. And it does kind of make sense in a way. Well, if you're not going to show the garden, you're not going to show the pot, because then it would be like, well, where'd that come from? Was that like something people brought it to the, in the ship, part of their personal belongings? But no, this turns out to be something that Walter was growing in the first place. Fifth scene is Daniel's bedroom flashback. This is a scene that was supposed to take place, I guess, as she is alone in her room thinking about her husband. We do get a flashback of her and her husband in what appears to be an apartment building. It's snowing outside, and he's talking to her about the cabin that he wants to build, and he was like, well, maybe I should change the window to here, or maybe I should leave it where it is. And they have this little sweet back and forth, kind of establishing a little more of their relationship. This was completely removed. Then you have a longer version of what becomes Jacob's funeral, and that is, instead of everybody already being there, which is how he jumped into the scene in the movie, we see how first Walter shows up, and she kind of tells him how much she appreciates the fact that he's there for her, and then little by little the rest of the crew arrives, and they kind of begin the memorial service that we then do see during the film. Lourdes Falls. Once they're down in the planet and the first guy that gets infected, basically, we do get a couple of extra shots of him acting sick, the symptoms that he's getting, where he can barely walk at some point, and he's trying to clear his head and that sort of thing, as they're running through the wheat field, trying to head back to the ship. Before she has to kind of start carrying him, more or less. We get a little more of that, which, no big deal. Crossing the Plaza. This is number 8 in the deleted scenes. This is basically an extended version of the scene where the survivors of the first attack, following David back to the hideout, I guess, they're crossing that whole plaza at night with all the dead, engineer race, all petrified all over the ground. And we do get a little more of them running, and then you do get this one shot of them being up high and kind of looking down, and they throw like a flare down into this area to see what's down there, and you do see the silhouettes of some other engineer ships down there too. So that's interesting. While in there, we get the 9th scene, which is Daniels thanks Walter. This is in response to the attack that the Neomorph at one point goes after Daniels, when they're out, outside. And Walter is able to deflect the attack, but in the process loses his robotic hand, fighting the creature. So here's a scene where she formally thanks him, and he reminds her that he's here to serve. This is a phrase that he repeats a number of times, and later on he tries to explain to David what that means. Completely different mentality between David and Walter. The 10th scene is Rosenthal's prayer. This takes place right before her attack, where she's kind of relaxing a little bit, kind of washing herself up, and she decides to pray, I believe in Hebrew, because she's Jewish. She's got a Jewish Star of David. Ironically, you have David, and you have David and then you have the Michelangelo's David in the beginning. But you do get that scene of her praying, openly, right as the attack is about to commence. So that's an interesting little tidbit there. The 11th scene is Walter reports back. Now, this is a scene where after Walter has one of his conversations with David, and he lets Daniels and Orm know that something's not right with David. He's got some wacky stuff going on. He said, it could be an unstable mental type of situation. Obviously, he's a robot, but, there's something wrong with him. And he says it could be because of a lack of maintenance, because of all these years that have passed without, properly being serviced, that he might have gone off the rails pretty much. And no kidding. Again, these are scenes that so far, most of these scenes we do get in the novel. The final scene that we get is the stairs to the egg room. Again, another novel scene. And this is David leading Orm down the stairs to where the eggs are being kept. And as they're about to enter the room, from the novel, apparently there's a horrendous stench coming from down there, from those eggs being kept down there. And David grabs off the wall. There's like a little pad thing, and there's some cream or something with lavender smell, and he kind of puts that in his nose, and he tells Orm to do the same thing because it's supposed to kind of keep the smell away, and this way he doesn't react so bad to the smell that's coming from down there. So again, another little minuscule scene that really doesn't matter much, but it is something different. Now, there were a lot of also many scenes that you do get little snippets here or there during the trailers that were not used in the movie. And we can't really go into too much detail on those because there's just so many of them and it's just outrageous. You do get the feeling from reading the novel, from watching the movie, from watching these deleted scenes, from listening to the interviews, is that, they shot a lot of different stuff. And something tells me Ridley Scott at the last minute decided to make some changes in terms of, there were some reshoots and there were some deletions here or there that were made that eventually, he had to, make up for, that do not coincide with some of the things that we would read, during the novel, for example. Now, the DVD has many extras, as most of them do, in terms of bonus features, and the deleted scenes are the main things that I really wanted to see, because it adds up to quite a bit. I believe they were saying it's something like 18 minutes of deleted material when you add it all up, which is a nice chunk of material. You do have from before, which included here, I believe you have the Crossing prologue, which we talked about, before the movie came out or around the time the movie came out, which is that whole sequence of kind of like a flashbacky kind of sequence of Shaw and David, traveling alone and her repairing David and David eventually releasing all the canisters to the engineer world. You have the Last Supper scene that is slightly extended also, with the whole crew getting ready to go into sleep and everybody, kind of having like one final toast, before they do that. But what is super, super interesting is something that I was not expecting, and, that's because I wasn't looking at what was coming. But this is something completely new, in a way, to this DVD. And what I'm talking about is 2 additional productions that were shot. Now, again, I'm not talking about the testimonials, the individual testimonials that they did, the promotional testimonials, or the Walter being created viral video, that kind of stuff. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about 2 more videos. The first one, it is referred to as the Phobos video. I think that's like a moon around Mars or something like that. But anyway, this is a video that was teased, I believe, during maybe San Diego Comic-Con or some event, letting people know that this is coming. And it may also be associated with a video game. But this is the real actors used, I believe, Fassbender and McBride and the guy that plays Lope. Rosenthal, I think, is the other one, and Daniels. And what they're doing is, it's almost like security footage, if you will, or medical footage, if you will, of them being tested by Weyland-Yutani. They sit on a chair, they're strapped to a chair, and they're exposed to frightful images to see what kind of reaction they get. And this would determine, I guess, what are their levels of stress in terms of, how stressed do they get depending on what frightening images they're shown. So you go through this video where different questions are being asked and different video images are shown. And some of those images are really like disturbingly graphic, violent images. And it's the character's reaction to them. Walter on one hand having almost like no reactions because he keeps reminding them he's an android and he doesn't really care. He doesn't really affect them. But some of the human characters obviously having all kinds of different reactions. Orem is trying to play it cool. Rosenthal is kind of falling apart. Lope is just, reacting in a different manner. And Daniels is trying to, continue to be strong through it, even though she's not. She's struggling with it. So it is an interesting, weird little experimental video, and it keeps you wanting to know, well, why would Weyland-Yutani at this point be concerned about those kind of stresses? Now, remember, this is a colonizing mission, so maybe it's part of the psychological profile that they're looking for. Remember, there's a scene where McBride's character, Tennessee, I think it was during one of those testimonial videos that he says something about how he's talking to his brother and it's like, he doesn't know how he passed the test, because whatever, his background check or something like that. So maybe, it is a way of trying to figure out if the people are mentally stable that you're being, you're putting on this mission, because it's a one-way trip, as they explain later on. What's interesting also is the fact that we are dealing with Weyland-Yutani now. Weyland has been dead for 10 years because he gets his head bashed in during Prometheus. So Weyland has merged with Yutani. So we do have a progression now of the company, the later to become evil company in a way. Now, the other video that we get, the other little digital short, if you will, it's called Advent. Now, this is probably the best thing about this DVD in terms of extras that you're not expecting. What Advent is, it's almost like a David point of view recording of his memories of what has taken place in this planet and his recommendations to Weyland Yutani as to what to do next, to letting them know what he's planning on doing next. So he refers to this message as being an olive branch, so meaning that because he knows they're going to be upset at the fact that he has basically hijacked the ship by the time this movie is over. And he is not only responsible for the death of just about everybody, if you think about it, including an entire civilization of extraterrestrial beings that the company was trying to find in the first place. He refers to them as an olive branch because he kind of tells them about the possible capabilities of this research that he has done. You know, capabilities in the field of weapons and biochemical research and this and that, the type of thing that you figure a conglomerate like Weyland or Yutani would be salivating over. But he kind of goes through the process of how, in the planet, he started doing experiments with plants and low-level animals, exposing them to these different type of things, and how those experiments, he would get somewhere with them. He was able to create these new kind of creatures, but never exactly the one he wanted them. The manner and, the strength and the veracity that he wanted these creatures to be. He talks about how he basically destroyed the engineers because he hated them, and the whole God complex that he has, and the creator and the master and the servant and that whole thing. And he hints at the fact that Shaw didn't want to kind of go along with him, and as a result of that, he killed her. And later on, he used her body to continue these experiments, and that using human parts, because he gets to the point where he's using bits and pieces of her to create these other experiments, made his discoveries or made his creations go further. They have become more violent, more strong, stronger, more agile, and they are kind of heading in that direction. There is a little bit of maybe contradictory statements in terms of when you read the book, you get the impression that the idea of the eggs kind of came from the engineers, that there were eggs there before. Maybe those eggs were not the full-blown, leathery, gigantic eggs that we are used to seeing, or the ones that David has in his special room in the movie. But the concept of having these creatures being born from eggs is something that it is mentioned in the past. But in this testimonial video that he's kind of giving to Weyland Yutani, he kind of mentions the fact that he's been almost perfecting, his technique to the point where he now has, he's developed these eggs, the delivery system, the face hugger and the egg inside. So that is very interesting. And he does credit Shaw with that. Something about the human anatomy, something about the fact that it's a female human that he's using. He's able to tap into the reproductory system and create these kind of creatures. And he kind of, goes on some of these rants about, again, this whole God complex that he has. And he explains how, he now has a ship full of potential subjects to continue his experiments, and that Daniels is going to be his queen, which is something that is, whoa, wait a minute now. So he's now talking about not having to create the eggs. I think he's now talking about creating a creature that can actually deliver the eggs. So we're talking about Alien Queen here, the aliens portion that we're talking about. So that is really, really interesting. And one of the things about it is that, I don't know, why are they giving us such great information, when normally you would want to keep quiet about this? Well, one of the problems or one of the reasons, one of the potential reasons why we're getting this information now is that this movie didn't do as well as they would have liked. Now, obviously, what they like is super mega blockbuster hits. This movie is made decent amount of money. It's going to make even more money in the video market, so it's going to make a decent amount of money. Around the time this movie was coming out, Ridley Scott all of a sudden is saying he's going to do 3 more, he's going to do 4 more, he's going to do as many as we want, because, he's kind of comparing it to Star Wars in terms of franchising it, and he wants to kind of open it up. So he's having his little fantasy, I guess, of how crazy he's going to go with these movies. But around that same time, and actually before Covenant came out, there was also a Neil Blomkamp treatment out there that Sigourney Weaver had even said she was going to be involved in, having to do with creating a sequel to Aliens that kind of ignores, from 3 forward. And that was gathering speed, but all of a sudden at the last minute they decided, no, we're going to go with Ridley Scott. We're going to put, Blomkamp on the shelf. We're going to wait and see what happens. And it looked as if they were kind of going to, bet hard on Ridley Scott. However, because the movie didn't make as much money as it wanted to make, like I said earlier, I have a feeling they're going to be telling Scott, you know what, you're not going to get 2 or 3 sequels out of this. What we're going to do, and this is the latest announcement that I've heard from Fox, is that they're going to give him 1 more movie to kind of wrap this story up. In other words, he's got 1 more movie that's going to bring us from the end of Covenant to the beginning of Alien. After that, they say they're going to reboot the whole franchise and move forward into the future with it, so that there are stories that are going to be told that don't necessarily involve any of these characters at all, obviously except other than the creature. So we'll see how that works out at the end. Scott seems to slightly reinforce that idea in one of the interviews he gives during the documentary here, for the making of the film, where he talks about how the next film he thinks is going to follow whatever happens to Daniels and David. Are they going to reach their destination? How are they going to deal with what's going on? I have my own theories, because you got to realize that, and this is something that was mentioned before, in some of these documentaries where they're taking a very long picture look at the story. With Prometheus, we got to learn about the engineers. So Alien had a couple of huge mysteries. The alien was a mystery, the main mystery. But you also had this whole engineer race, which they weren't even called engineers. It was the space jockey inside this bizarre-looking ship. So with Prometheus, you kind of got to know who these space jockeys, engineers, were, and how influential they were from a DNA point of view about our own creation. So we got to learn that. In this movie, we get to learn about the xenomorph, exactly how it was created. And by the time we get to this movie, the xenomorph that we are used to seeing does pop out of, one of the last characters to be killed, as a result of a face hugger induced infestation. Because up to that point, before Aram gets infected, before Loke gets infected, all the other infections were as a result of spores, which were, indirectly a form of what the original black goo was. In Prometheus, the black goo infects people directly by exposing them to that black goo. But that black goo turns those individuals into super violent individuals. It is a little bit later in the film when you start cross-breeding or cross-exposing with different DNA samples of creatures and the black goo that you start to get these creatures that are super aggressive. They're not just walking time bombs. They're just aggressive creatures. In Prometheus, you have, I believe it was like the worm leads to the thing that gets Fifield and Gazpacho guy, if you guys remember. So, that starts with the worm thing. Then you have a situation where Shaw's, because of again, this goes back to reproduction. Because of her reproductory system and her infection from her boyfriend, gives birth to this thing that turns into a super aggressive kind of creature, but the form is not there. It's not the form we're used to. It has the aggressive tendencies. Then that creature does attack a engineer, and it attacks it in the manner of a face hugger, except it's a different creature, but it does use the face hugger kind of mechanism, the entry through the mouth creating something and putting some kind of seed in your stomach that then flourishes into another creature. And that creature that popped out at the end of Prometheus is a very alien-y looking xenomorphish kind of creature. Now, in this movie, you have the neomorphs, which kind of look like a little bit like the Deacon, the ones from the end of Prometheus, but the delivery system is a little different. The delivery system goes, from what we learned that, David devastates the entire planet basically, or at least the entire continent or the entire area by releasing the black goo, which then infects everybody. Everybody dies. The black goo or the spores of that black goo then goes after insects, mammals, any kind of animal or plants out there and devastates them. And then when it has nothing left to devastate, anything left to convert to some kind of a creature, it then lies dormant. It kind of hibernates in some shape or form. And we do see in Covenant that the shape it hibernates in is in the form of a spore, almost like a little mushroom that kind of hides these spores and gets triggered once, it detects life around them. I think it's even mentioned at some point that the fact that, David or even Mother could not detect any life because even those spores were being dormant at the time, so you couldn't detect them. But they're also talking about, I remember, about the fact that it's almost like nanotechnology. So it's not just biological, it's mechanical. And that goes back to Giger. The Giger alien is a biomechanical nightmare because it is combining biology in terms of animals and the reproductive system of the animals or different creatures. But it also has a very intrinsic, DNA structure reprogramming of, what actually makes those creatures the way they are. And that's one of the things that makes it even more dangerous, and it makes it super attractive, I believe, to Weyland-Yutani. So what happens at this point is, like I said before, Weyland-Yutani now, at the end of this movie, based on this message that David sends out to them, he knows what's going on in terms of there's something out there. We lost the ship. We lost the Prometheus. We now lost the Covenant. But, you could kind of picture that now they're in kind of a wait mode. And they're like, if we hear anything from any of our ships having to do with any kind of an alien creature or alien anything, we should really pay attention because that's probably what we want to get our hands on. This could be a potential gold mine if we are able to, grab this and turn it into some kind of a profitable weapon, for the weapons division, if you remember Aliens. So it is very interesting, that we're at that point now. So by the end of these two films, we've told everybody what the space jockeys and the dreadnoughts, the ship is all about, the engineers. By the end of the second film, we know all about how we got to that point. Now we know that once we started combining this weird pathogen that has been weaponized by David's experiments. This didn't just happen on its own. On its own, this would have been a self-destructive kind of virus that, just like with Fifield and these other people that got infected. They just go nuts. They go insane. It's a very effective weapon, for them. It's also possible that the engineers had already experimented in that sort of thing. And that's why some of the work that David has, could have came from the engineers as it is hinted on the book. And that for whatever reason, maybe they stopped and they say, no more, we can't experiment on this anymore. It's out of control. So they kind of take it back. Well, David pushes forward, but David introduces almost like the missing ingredient, the secret ingredient, and that is human DNA that makes it completely into the weapon that the alien creature, the xenomorph we know is all about. So at this point, like I said, we're at a point now where the next movie, hopefully it'll get made, I believe it's going to be called Awakening, will bring us to Alien. Now, where do we have to be when it comes to Alien? That's a good question. Well, we know that they're an alien. You're going to have a dreadnought with a belly full of eggs and a dead engineer, most likely. I think it's a dead engineer. I don't think we never got a really good look inside that suit in the first film because the whole thing was crumbling. So for all we know, there could be a human inside that suit. I don't know. Could be David. Who the hell knows? I have no idea. But We are going to have to figure out what happens to David and Daniels. Most likely Daniels will not survive, and most of the, I imagine, colonists will not survive. Something will happen between David where he will somehow fail in a way to achieve what he wants to achieve. The fact that there's so many eggs in Alien could suggest that a queen eventually will have been made by David, maybe even Daniels. We don't know what happened to that colony. I don't know if they're going to acknowledge that colony. I don't know if survivors exist in that colony. I don't know if the colony is completely lost. I don't even know if they ever make it to the colony. Who knows? Maybe David is just going to go experiment crazy in the ship, and even before they reach the colony. Who knows? The other question then becomes, well, where the heck does that dreadnought come from? Well, is it possible that other engineers, maybe that were in other planets, come back to check on this planet and realize what happened, and that the fact that maybe David, from a human planet, an AI from a human planet was responsible for their, for the extermination of their entire planet? It's possible. We also have to remember that Walter, theoretically, might still be alive in this planet that they're on right now. So that's another possibility. That planet had other dreadnoughts, so it is possible that Walter might be able to get on a dreadnought and fly out there, see if he could kind of catch up to them, kind of like what Shaw did. That's a possibility too. That would introduce the idea of where's another dreadnought. Now, the belly full of eggs, that could be David's hijinks. Who knows? So I think the purpose of this story, of the third film, if we ever get it, is going to be just a link. The third film is, how do we link these two concepts together? How do we bridge those two apart? We've already explained a lot about the engineers. We've already explained a lot about the xenomorph. But now at this point, you got to unite those two things, with Alien. So that is a huge possibility of where we're going next. The film, not only this film, but what we find out about the previous film in a way, they are kind of downers the way they end, to the point where, one of my biggest objections to Alien 3 was the fact that they opened the film by destroying all the characters you kind of love from Aliens. And to me, that just kills it for me. It kills it because it I could not enjoy that film anymore, because it's almost like a director taking a sledgehammer to this beautiful crystal palace you created and then destroying it and saying, here, I'm going to destroy this and I'm going to tell you another story now. It's like, no, you can't do that. Well, for some reason, I don't mind that much in these films. The fact that Shaw, I'm not happy about it, but the fact that Shaw is dead, I kind of understand it to progress the story, because you can't have really survivors on a story that it's all based on mystery. If you're going backwards, odds are some of these guys are not going to make it. But, this particular film also ends in that manner. Now, what's really interesting is the fact that, and again, this is probably Ridley trying to be a little more brutal with the audience, because the novel ends with David, who's pretending to be Walter at the end, puts everybody to sleep, puts Tennessee to sleep, puts Daniels to sleep, but doesn't hint at all to her as to what he is, as opposed to in the movie where she kind of understands by asking her about, the cabin. And all of a sudden she's kind of like, oh my God, and then she falls asleep. So she's like, oh my God, she just ruined her dreams, basically. But in the book, it also ended that way too, where he doesn't tell her anything. But then the fact that he walks over to where the sleeping passengers are, and those embryos, that area with all those embryos, and he kind of places or checks on a couple of his little facehugger embryos. He doesn't necessarily regurgitate them at that time. Again, that's something I think they either reshot or added later. And then sends the message. He sends a message to Weyland-Yutani, not as detailed, obviously, what we get here, but a message telling them that, we had some problems and, we're going to keep going and blah, 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 and this and that. But in the book, the message is a little more explicit. And that is the gigantic, shocking ending for the book. In the movie, we get a little earlier with Daniel's reaction. So I'm personally looking forward to. I want to see the continuation of the story. I know it's not a perfect movie. I get it. But some of these actors are so damn good. I mean, Fassbender is just great. The way that he plays those two characters. And, I did read in one of the books that says that he kind of played it like a serial killer. He has to play David straight. And he has his own agenda, and he's going to be continually, straight about it. Same thing with Walter. Walter is the opposite, but he has to also, adhere to those rules of how to play that character. So, once we have more news on the next possible film, we will let you guys know.
You can collect them all.
You are a toy!
Batteries not included.
Get those wonderful toys.
Details on specially marked packages at participating stores.
Is that the $6 Million Man's boss?
It's Oscar Goldman.
Why do you have that?
That's worth a lot of money. That's much more valuable than Steve Austin.
Action figures each sold separately.
Hi, I'm Chucky, and I'm your friend to the end.
Some assembly required.
All your favorite Star Wars heroes and villains.
I have 3 of each. 1 to display, 1 to open, and 1 just in case.
On today's collectible segment, we are going to once again talk about posters, movie posters, and as I mentioned a while back, I've started displaying my old collection of movie posters and even some new ones that I've recently gotten. And today I'm going to talk about 2 different ones. One of them is John Carpenter's The Thing, classic movie poster, very simple in a way looking poster, and very mysterious. Because if you are familiar with the poster, you see the shape of a man, most likely, in what appears to be Arctic gear, standing in what appears to possibly be snow or ice. But the face, you cannot see the face. It is a kind of like a ray of light that's shining through the face that kind of does not allow you to see what's happening in there. You do see the outline of what could be a parka or one of those snow hats, the hoods that you kind of flip over your head, in snow gear. But the face is completely obstructed by this light that's just shining through. And all through the poster itself, you do get all these what appears to be reflections of ice and snow. And it's very blue and black and white. Classic posters, I'm sure you've seen it a million times. The history of the poster itself, it's a little bizarre in a way because... Now, I understand that the movie was shot with as much secrecy as possible because they didn't want to reveal anything about it. And recently I watched the Shout Factory's latest version of The Thing, remastered, extra new commentaries, extra new, bonus material here and there. And yeah, from what I understand, from what I've been reading, first of all, the poster was drawn by Drew Struzan, who is a amazing, prolific artist when it comes to movie posters. Again, he's one of these guys, like I mentioned last time, that there are it's like the John Williams of movie posters. You know what I mean? It's these names that keep coming back and back and back, especially, when the art of movie poster was more popular than I guess it is now. But the story behind this particular poster is a very unusual little story because from what I understand, he was called, Struzan, he got a phone call from Universal saying, hey, we got this movie and we actually need a fully finished poster by tomorrow. And he was like, well, what's the movie? Well, it's called The Thing. We're remaking The Thing. It's John Carpenter, the director. It's like, oh, okay. Well, the problem is that we can't really show you any material from it. We don't have anything we can show you. Now, whether they couldn't show it to him because they didn't physically have anything or because they were trying to keep it secret, I'm not sure. The bottom line is that Struzan was not supplied with anything. So the way that they described the movie to him was like, well, do you remember the original, The Thing from Another World? And he was like, yeah, I remember that film. He's like, okay, well, kind of go off on that. Give us something that has something to do with that film. Use that as your guide to what the poster should look like. So from what I've read, he started coming up with a concept, and he had his wife take a Polaroid picture of him, wearing a very wintry parka. And in that pose where, both hands to the side and his legs to the side and kind of coming towards the camera, a very threatening manner. And he used, he was basically his own reference. And obviously he didn't use his face because the poster does not let you see the face, but that's what he used. And as he's coming up with this concept, he then has a couple more pictures taken, this time 35mm pictures, and his wife is able to develop them right away and, use them and, to help him put it together. And he is able to, I believe, fax over, a very rough concept of what he has in mind. And they said, okay, do it. We need it first thing in the morning. So apparently he's there painting away the entire day, the entire night, and by 9 in the morning, he gets a Universal guy who shows up to kind of pick up the poster. And I don't know if it's true or not, but he kind of jokes about that, the paint was still a little wet by the time the guy got the poster. And apparently they used it, and they have it, and up to this day, it is one of the, most iconic, prints for a poster. It's been redone a number of times. Different companies have done their own take on it. With Struzan's approval, he's been able to have these things reprinted. That whole Mondo company that they do these vintage retro kind of posters, they've done different versions of them. There's a million pieces of poster art. A lot of it fan-made or artist-made, not necessarily linked directly to the original release of the film. But like I said, it is a super, super iconic poster. Also, with this that I mentioned before, this Shout Factory re-release of the film, I would also say, pick this up if you're a fan of The Thing. The DVD itself has a whole bunch of cool little interviews and commentaries, and one specific one with Dean Cundey where he talks about one possible hint of who could the person that first gets infected in the film. There's this whole thing about the dog that you see this shape, this shadow on the wall. The dog is visiting people's rooms in the beginning, and that first person could be the first infected one. And at the time of shooting the film, they purposely did not use any of the actors as the shadow because they didn't want anybody to know who it was. They mentioned that they used a stuntman, the guy who doubles for Kurt Russell, who had also doubled as the Shape in Halloween 2. So this is a guy who's used to doing stunt work, and they purposely used his likeness to kind of throw everyone off. Now, there are theories that have been going around that first guy is Palmer in the movie. And in a way, it could make sense that it's a very good theory because one of the things Cundey said was that when they're doing the blood test, they threw in a quick little hint as to who the person who is, taking the blood test is infected before that person gets revealed. And the way they did it is that every time you see a close-up of the person's face, and, it's very tense and it's very, nerve-wracking scene where everybody's nervous because they don't know if they're the one. And he says that if you look closely, every person that is human, at that point at least, has a gleam in their eye. You can actually see a light being reflected off their eye, a little white glint, in the eye. But Palmer is the only one, when you look at him, there's no glint. It's completely black. Now, that's good and it works because in that scene, it happens that way. And you could kind of say, well, maybe the Shape in that room before could have been Palmer. I don't know how early he was infected. One day I'm going to have to do a breakdown or at least a theoretical chart of who got infected when based on fan theories because Carpenter is never going to tell us. He's just not going to do it. So, he purposely does not want to tell you. Even at the end of the movie, there's all kinds of theories. Is it Kurt Russell or is it Keith David or David Keith? I can never get his name. And there is one theory also going around that if you notice the breath, when Russell talks at the end, you could see his breath. You visually see it because of the cold. But when Childs talks, you don't see the breath. So is that a hint that Childs is the creature and Kurt Russell is not? Then there's another theory going around that because Russell doesn't drink from the bottle, that could be hinting at the fact that he might be the creature, which, again, that really doesn't have, but none of that is proved. And the other thing that they do mention in one of the documentaries, and this is nothing new because it's been mentioned before, is that when the movie was being tested, focus group shown, preview, they had just in case, I believe the editor of the film, he kind of gave John Carpenter the idea of, why don't you shoot an additional ending, just in case. And the additional ending would have been what you see now of those two guys at the end, and the whole place is going up in flames, and they're just sitting there having their drink. And then at certain points, I guess you dissolve, or you cut to McGreedy being at a rescue place, maybe another station, maybe some kind of rescue place where he's being given the blood test and he's passing it. This way you are assured that your lead good guy is not the Thing. But that apparently was never used. They got to the point where John Carpenter was able to stick to his guns and keep his original ending, leaving everything, in a dark, dark place on purpose. But it's cool because this is the type of movie that, like I said before, every time I watch it, it's like a murder mystery. It's like I'm watching Columbo. You're always trying to figure it out. You know what's going to happen at the end, which is kind of like a Columbo episode, if you think about it. Sometimes it's not about the murder, it's about the steps that led to the murder. Well, here, you know what's going to happen at the end, but the only mysterious part of the movie that you're still always trying to figure out is, when are people the Thing and when are they not the Thing? So yeah, that's going to be one, I guess, for the future that I'm going to have to tackle sooner or later. But again, if you're into collecting, here's another great item, the poster. You can find these now. They make reproductions of these posters. They're not exactly, to the size that you might want them in terms of the original one-sheet sizes, but they do have so many multiple sizes. You can have them super big or super small at super reasonable prices. And for me, again, believe me, I love vintage stuff. I have a ton of vintage posters, but I'm not in any shape or form right now to start paying hundreds of dollars to get my hands on a vintage whatever. So some of these reproduced posters, the quality is amazing, super sharp. The colors are just excellent. And, they get the job done. You get to live that movie for, and in my case, for a few weeks while I'm working here in the office, and you get to see them. Now, for my second poster of the month, I'm hitting The Empire Strikes Back. This is that second poster I have on display right now. And this is an original one. This is one of the original ones I used to have. Bought it back in probably 1981 or 1982. This particular poster, in terms of which one I'm talking about, it's called the re-release poster, the July 31st, 1981 re-release. This is the first time the film was re-released, as opposed to the original release back in 1980. This particular poster is done by Tom Jung. Now, Tom Jung is a name that's familiar to Star Wars poster collectors because he did the original Star Wars poster. The original Star Wars poster has a weird little history in terms of the classic painting. There are two posters that look almost identical to each other. One is by Tom Jung, and the other one is by the Hildebrand brothers. They look very similar. They have the same pose because those were the instructions they were given. But the Tom Jung poster was the first one, the Star Wars one. And then they said, all right, you know what? This is a little too dark. They went to the Hildebrand and said, can you do a different version, a little more brighter, colorful version of it? And they kind of came up with almost the same thing. So what they ended up doing was they used the original Jung one as the classic Star Wars release poster for the US, and then they ended up using the Hildebrand version for other stuff, such as, I believe, some of the UK, posters and that sort of thing. That art never goes to waste. They always end up using it one way or the other. But what I'm dealing with right now is The Empire Strikes Back. They, once again, they asked, some of these artists to return to, come up with new concepts for the posters. Now, the original Empire Strikes Back is also known as the Gone with the Wind poster by a completely different artist. It's the same guy, apparently, that did the Jaws poster, another heavy hitter in the poster industry. And this is the Gone with the Wind one because, you have Han and Leia in that Gone with the Wind pose between him and her, and you have Luke, in top of the Tauntaun and Vader hovering in the background, a lot of ice and snow around it. That's the classic Empire poster, the one that came out when you first probably saw the film. This is a time where they would re-release films. When they were blockbusters, they would re-release them the following year or Christmas or something like that. Limited engagements. And, Star Wars did it quite a number of times. And Empire did it too. And for the first re-release, what they did is they came up with this poster by Tom Jung. The poster is very different looking than the classic one. It's cool because it does have a majority of the actors on the poster. And this is something very important because when you re-release a film, you're no longer worried about surprises in terms of, oh, we can't reveal this character, we can't reveal that character, which is something that happens sometimes. And in the original Empire poster, you had a number of characters missing from that first poster. There was no Yoda, there was no Lando, for example. So that's something that was added a little later, to complete the poster, to make it a little more accurate. But by the time you reach these re-releases, they're using now different posters, different artists, and they're able to put all these characters, on the poster face. The drawings are, the art is a little different. It's I don't want to call it monochrome, but it is not realistic coloring. Everything has a shade of kind of red and purple and orange around it. You have Vader looming over everything with this huge light that's kind of shining above his shoulder. You have Luke as the primary character and Yoda next to him. You have the 3 AT-ATs in the bottom. Over to one side, you have Lando. Again, they're not concerned about hiding any characters. And on the other side, you have Han and Leia. It's funny because Han is almost doing the New Hope pose, with him kind of hunched down with the gun sticking up, and Leia's kind of looking up. It's a very damsel in distress type of pose. And you do have in the background a couple of snow speeders kind of flying around. So that's kind of cool. And in a way, you do have these characters almost in importance order and importance size. Vader is looming over everyone. Luke is the main actor, I guess, because he's the main character. And then Han, Leia, and Lando are all kind of equal size. Now, like I said, the one I have is the original re-release. I had, unfortunately, in order to make it fit in when I used to display it back when I first bought it, I had cut out the white border around it so it would fit these panels I had. So, unfortunately, I did ruin it somewhat by removing the white border around the poster, which I'm sure, if you're into reselling them, that is something that kind of destroys your price. But I really don't care because it's for me. It doesn't bother me. I have it here. It looks gorgeous. I love it. Now, what's interesting about this poster is that when they did the 1982 re-release, they almost used exactly the same art, but they did kind of change some things around. Instead of the art being, let's say, about half the poster, for the 82, the art becomes almost 3/4 of the poster. The title of the movie shoots up to the top of the poster instead of being underneath the AT-ATs. So now you do have more art space in a way. You still have Vader up there, holding his fingers, whatever he's doing. You still have Luke, big head. Yoda's head is a little smaller now. It kind of matches Lando and it kind of matches Leia. And Han, for some reason, for this re-release, we now see a half shot of him. His head is the same as Lando and Leia, but we now see his entire chest up to his waist. So for some reason, they decided to make Han, for poster reasons, a more important character. In a way, he's kind of being billed, I guess, as a third important character. Vader is there looming over everyone. Luke's head is still kind of big. But now Han is kind of positioning himself outside of the regular sizes of those other characters. So it is kind of unusual how they, the following year, they use those characters. Now, one possibility is that the year is 1982 at this point for this poster, and Harrison Ford is coming off of Raiders of the Lost Ark and possibly Blade Runner. So it is conceivable that people are trying to capitalize on his, hit, especially with Raiders. He's a big time player, now as far as Hollywood is concerned. So maybe that's what they were trying to do. Now, what's interesting also is that even though it is another, like I said, it's another Jung poster, and I wonder, I'm not sure if maybe that this was just another concept he came up with originally and then they saved it, or he actually tweaked it. But they are kind of following that same color palette, that purple, red, orange, whitish kind of color palette, but it seems like they added so much more color to it. The one that I have, they're very passive colors. They're very calm colors. This is more dark. It is darker, and it is angrier colors, if you will. They're more deep reds and deep oranges, very different shades of dark and deep orange and red and purples. So the poster does look different. Like I said, it is probably one of my oldest original Star Wars posters. I do have an actual Star Wars re-release that I will talk about eventually, but as far as Empire goes, this is it for me. This is the only one that's vintage that I own. Hopefully one day I will own a few more, even if they are reprints, because like I mentioned before, the reprint quality is just fantastic. It's just fantastic. All right, well, I hope you guys enjoy today's show. We are going to, as usual, continue covering the Alien franchise in whatever direction it goes. We hope it goes in the direction that, I'm leaning towards, which that is, let Ridley Scott complete his films or film. But, it would appear to be maybe there's only one more left for him to do. I'm not opposed to having other filmmakers try out other different things. I really was curious and looking forward to the possibility of Neil Blomkamp doing, a post-Aliens continuation, which that's right up my alley. Anything that kind of destroys and negates, Alien 3 especially, I'm all for. But we'll see, because, again, everything depends on whatever money the previous film makes. And as I've mentioned before, the studio looks like they want to try something completely different after Scott is done doing his thing. And I hope you also enjoyed our poster segment. It's really fun doing these poster segments because, for a few weeks I get to stare at these posters and, it kind of brings back so many memories of not only seeing the film, but in some of these cases we have them on DVD and we rewatch them so many times, and sometimes we find new things about it, and, new interviews get shot and come out where all of a sudden new revelations come up about certain things that we were wondering about. But it's really cool to have them. And, if you're into that sort of collecting, between the authentic vintage versions of these posters and the recreations, the reproductions, they are fantastic, these reproductions. So I hope you guys enjoy that. So on behalf of everybody here at the show, thank you for listening, and we will see you here next time at GeekFest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
100,000 years ago, it found its way into our galaxy. Trapped in the frozen wasteland of Antarctica, it could not escape. Now the men of Station 4 have made a monumental discovery. An alien creature had frozen, but not to death. And man,
it isn't Benny's,
is the warmest place to hide.
If you would like to subscribe to our show, send us messages, or see video links to some of the topics we talked about today, please visit our homepage at geekfestrants.com or our YouTube channel, Facebook page, or iTunes at GeekFest Rants.
I don't know what we're yelling about!
GeekFest Rants is produced by Carlos Perone, copyright 2017.
This broadcast is part of the IC Robots Radio Network. Visit icrobots.com for this and many other nerd/nostalgia related podcasts. You won't be sorry for long.